Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi barakatuh, and welcome to another episode in the series, The Cross Questioned. And today we are continuing with our investigation of the 3 days, according to Christianity, the arrest, crucifixion, and resurrection of the Prophet Isa that Christians would like us to believe actually took place. And as we've investigated in this series, that we do not, as Muslims, agree with anything about the explanations that have been given in the New Testament of the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. But that is a separate issue. What we are looking at now is what the actual text says, and we're giving viable, better solutions to the interpretation of these verses. Because a Christian is trying to make you believe that this is what the text means, and we can show you with other versions or other explanations that are more credible than the one they're offering. If we can do that, that means the text is unreliable. We are not agreeing with anything that we are saying. We are just simply creating a problem so that you can resolve it yourself by having a look and saying, but if he said that is a possible explanation for this, maybe I need to ask my pastors, my priests, my religious leaders, why they don't accept that as truth. Because it's better than the one the church is offering you. We are telling you that you should rather leave what is being told to you in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and rather find out what the Quran is saying about this instance. Because this book that you're reading is leading you away from the truth instead of leading you to truth. Now we're going to move on in the series to having a look at what happened when Mary of Magdala, when she gets to the garden. She walks into the garden, and there in the garden she looks for the tomb of where the prophet is supposed to have been buried, where Jesus is supposed to have been buried. And as she walks towards the body, she finds that the body is missing, and she cries out. It says that when Mary found the body, she cried out. And the text can be found in John chapter 20, verse 11 to 15. And I'm more or less going to paraphrase it without exaggerating anything from the text. It says in the text that she turned back after she had cried out, and she saw Jesus standing, and she did not know it was Jesus standing there when she turned around. And she stopped him, and she thought that he was a gardener. And she said to him, Master, where have you taken him? Because I have come to see where he is, and I find that he has been taken away. Do you know where he has been taken to? So this is the gist of what happens in that dialogue. Now, when we read this text, if you read what the text says, it leads one to only one obvious understanding of this text. Not any other way can be understood from this text. Then there is no doubt that she is talking about a living person. She is not, read the text yourself, she is not asking where the dead body is. If she meant, where is the dead or buried body, then she would say, where have you buried him? Where have you reburied the body? Where have you taken the body to be buried? There is no question that she is talking about anything else than a living body. This is not what happened according to Islam. We don't agree with any of this, but by reading the text alone, that's what you see. In any case, even if we give it and we say, fine, it was a dead body, why would a Jewess want to come to a dead body in the first place? She was afraid of coming near that body in case of defilement. And she would have been afraid of the Jews just like she had been the day before. If she had come out on the Sabbath, she would have been afraid of the Jews. If she had come out on the Friday, she would have been afraid of the Jews. As a Jew, she would have been very much afraid of what the other Jews would have thought of her at that time. Jesus, whom she misunderstood as a gardener, was already in a disguise, ready to leave for Galilee if we read this text. The fact as well that creates more doubts in the story is that the fact that Jesus, whom she knows so well, is standing there and she's unable to recognize him. She looks at him and is unable to see that is him. Again gives you the two possible explanations that are better than the one that Christianity is offering. One, it is not Jesus, and it is the substitute person that was put there. Or, two, it is another person who was caught on the way of maybe covering up or cleaning up the scene of where this body was laid. But it's not Jesus, otherwise she would have recognized him. She has a dialogue with him, and only later in the dialogue does she hear and recognize the words, but not what he looks like. Perhaps this all happened in such a way that she was in a state and she could not actually see what he looked like, but that is very, very unlikely. The earlier Gospels tell us that the people were already on their way to Galilee, so we don't have in the earlier Gospels this whole account of coming there. Another interesting thing is, why was he fully disguised? Why does this writer write that he was fully disguised? What does that mean? Did it mean he had a covering over his face? Did it mean he hid the markings that were on his wrists or his feet? What does this mean he was fully disguised? When the people are told that in the Quran it says that he was made to look like Jesus, Christians say, that's craziness. We would never believe that. Who would be fooled by that? And yet, in the New Testament, we have similar terminologies used where it says he was fully disguised. If he did go from this point where he was in his full disguise and he walks on the road to Emmaus with those other two that we find about later on the way to Galilee, again, the people were unable to recognize him because, again, he was fully disguised. Even when he appears to his disciples and he shows them his hands and his feet, many of them did not believe, perhaps because he was still in his fully disguised state. What does fully disguised mean? Maybe fully disguised is a better way of saying it wasn't him. So there are lots more feasible explanations than the one that has been given in the New Testament, which is very, very hard to pull off if you try to say it was Jesus but they didn't recognize him. Not likely. These are people that were with him day in and day out. They hung on every word he said. Not a syllable came out of his mouth that they did not hang on to. They were hero worshippers. Christians want us to believe that he claimed at that time that he was the Son of God. I doubt that the disciples believed that. But we are led to believe by Christianity that they believed that. How would they not know? How would they not believe that it was this messenger that was with them right there in that garden? It's not possible to believe that explanation. The only explanations that are feasible is that it was a substitutional person that was put on the cross, and it's that person that they saw, or it was somebody else that they saw and was not Jesus, who was trying to pull off some type of scenario, act, whatever it might be. That is more believable than the one that has been proposed by the Christian today. Much more likely to have happened. But what about the story in John chapter 11, verse 44? Remember that Lazarus had been raised and he got out of the tomb in his burial clothes. Remember it says that he walked out in his burial clothes. So he was like mummified. Maybe he would have been like, his feet would have been walking like a penguin. He wouldn't be able to take big steps because he was wrapped up in the clothing. So you can imagine this, like those horror movies, oh, walking out of the grave. Not that I'm trying to belittle it or mock it. I'm just trying to put a picture in your head. That's how Lazarus comes out of the grave as recorded in the Bible. Now, if Jesus left his linen shroud behind, as the Catholics would like us to believe in the shroud of tunic, all the strips or whatever the burial material might have been when he resurrected, in the sepulchre where he left them, in the grave where he left them, where did he get his new clothes from? Especially when his clothes had been already divided, when we looked at previous episodes, into 4 equal parts by the people that were casting lots to take his clothing. So he had none of those clothes. He was naked on the cross. We know for a fact he was naked. There was nothing on him. We know this from the text itself. When he gets put into the grave, he is wrapped in strips of cloth, or, if you want, the linen, or whatever it might be. But in the narrative it says, all that was neatly folded there. So he had nothing. He was naked again. So where does he get new clothing from? How does he get this clothing? Unless the angels brought him a new change of clothing from heaven. And this might have been expected for someone who is very, very important, like we have in the story of Superman, where Superman has these special clothes that come from Krypton. Maybe in the same way, these angels bring him special clothes, and maybe they are provided for him, and they give him the ability to walk through walls and to be able to be in upper rooms. Maybe the clothes give him that special ability. But if that is the case, then he is spirit body and not human anymore. And so this provides a whole new set of interesting questions that we have to look at when we're looking at the story of the supposed resurrected Christ. So the new clothes scenario is one that makes you think even more about this whole question of what happened at the crucifixion. Well, let us now take a quick break, and when we get back from the break, we'll continue, inshallah.
The value of money in the hereafter will be measured by its proper use in the present.
يا أيها الذين آمنوا أنفقوا مما رزقناكم من قبل أن يأتي يوم لا بيع فيه ولا خلة ولا شفاعة.
According to the glorious Quran, one of the best ways to use your money is to spend it in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by spreading His message of Islam. Peace TV is a non-profit Islamic satellite television channel that is primarily dedicated for just that cause, the proper presentation of Islam. It's a great choice to invest in it and a golden opportunity to purify your wealth in a way that pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Support Peace TV. Send your zakat and donations to IRFI Al Ryan Bank, 47 Calthorpe Road, Birmingham, UK, B151TH. Pound account number 011-32301. IBAN GB49ARAY 30008301 132301. Sort code 300083. Swift BIC code ARAY GB22. Please confirm your contribution at support@peacetv.tv.
Support Peace TV, the solution for humanity.
Courage it takes to stand up for what you believe in. Courage it takes to be true and righteous. Courage it takes to dare and answer your questions, be they social, political, economic, educational, or religious. To get clear and convincing answers,
test your courage and question me in Dare to Ask.
Dare to Ask, next on Peace TV.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And we are continuing with our series, The Cross Question. Before the break, we're talking about these clothes that magically or miraculously appeared. And we said, where did he get these clothes from? He had no clothes on when he was buried. He was wrapped up in material. So where does he get his new clothes from? And the clothes must have been odd clothing, whatever the clothes might have been, because Mary, when she sees him, thinks that he's a gardener. So they must have been different to the average people if she thought he was a gardener. But anyway, we finished with that point. Now we're moving on. During the same point where he comes out with these transfigured clothing, or this special clothing, or this gardener's clothing that he had on, Mary Magdalene did not recognize Jesus in the beginning. When Mary Magdalene recognized Jesus in his gardener clothes, she then wanted to touch his feet. Now, when she suddenly realizes that who he is, for whatever reason, we don't know, she is stopped from touching him. And in John chapter 20, verse 17, he says, do not touch me, or touch me not, for I am not yet ascended to my Father. I have not moved up to my Father. Ascended means to move up. So in John chapter 20, verse 17, she wants to touch him, and he says, don't touch me, for whatever reason, we don't know. By this, he did not mean to say that she could not touch him when he was going to ascend, or because he still needed to ascend, or anything like that. What could he possibly have meant when he said that? Do not touch me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. What could he mean by this? What does he mean by ascending? Surely, if he really had this supernatural, mystical body that we are now led to believe from the New Testament, something miraculous must have already transpired in his physical body if he's able to walk through a closed tomb. Remember, the tomb was closed, and when they opened the tomb, it was empty. So he had already come out of the tomb while the stone was still in front of it. So he's already got a mystical body. So he says, don't touch me yet, because I have not yet ascended to my Father. How does he get this body? Are you confused? Well, I'm confused as well. How did this all happen? Well, perhaps what is actually meant by this dialogue, it's an offer of an alternative theory. Not one that Muslims agree with, not ones that Muslims believe, but an alternative theory nevertheless. Better than the theory that is offered by Christians saying that he had to first ascend and then come down because his body was still spirit, or it wasn't fully flesh, or whatever the story might be. I'm going to offer you an alternative theory. Perhaps what he actually meant to say, and it's easy to translate it this way from the text that we find in the Greek, so the Greek might have taken it from the Aramaic, because once you take it from one language and move it into another language, you lose the sense. I'll give you a quick example. In my country, we have a language called Afrikaans. We have lots of languages in my country. It's like India, lots of language, lots of dialects. We have something called a double negative in Afrikaans, which is like Dutch. And there's a sentence that goes like this. You're not going to understand it, but I'll translate it directly, and then I'll translate it the way it actually says. It says, Ek wil nie stad toe gaan nie. Translated directly, I never ever want to go to town. The actual translation is, today I don't want to go to town. Because there's something called a double negative, you would make it never ever, or absolutely never. If you didn't understand the rules of that language. In the same way, we could easily understand the text where it says, going from the Aramaic to Hebrew, from Hebrew to Greek to Latin to English, that there could have been a mistake in the translation or the transmission. Or they could have been accurately translated exactly right, and this is just an alternative theory that I'm giving you. When it says in the text, do not touch me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father, could be understood to mean, and this is maybe what he actually meant, don't worry, I am not dead, I am alive. I did not die, but please do not touch me because it hurts. This is just as acceptable as what the theory is of don't touch me because I have not yet ascended to my Father. Perhaps he's saying, do not touch me because I have not yet healed properly. It's still painful. So when we look at the text, that is a far logical explanation to the one that is given here. Now the apologist is going to scream out at me, and he's going to say, nonsense. But did Jesus ascend at this point? John 20 verse 17 says, do not touch me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. But he doesn't ascend to the Father. We don't hear him ascend to the Father. So he doesn't. So this text is wrong. So it's more likely that he's saying, don't touch me, I am not dead, but it is painful if you touch me. That is more like, don't touch me now, it is painful. Then, don't touch me now, I have not yet ascended to the Father, which he doesn't do. If he said, don't touch me now, I'm going to ascend to the Father, that's what you would expect to happen. Doesn't happen. We're going to get to the ascending part just now, where we're going to deal with that in more detail. What about on the road, where Jesus is now got this transformed body or whatever it might have been. While he is in this transformed body, or these special garments, whatever it is that he has on, the disguise of Jesus in his gardener clothes must have been very good, so that his own disciples could not recognize him on the road. Maybe it's similar to Superman and Clark Kent again. I mean, many of my friends used to rip me off, used to joke at me and laugh at me, and they'd say to me, how can you like Superman as a comic? He looks exactly the same. Superman and Clark Kent look exactly the same. All he does is he takes off his glasses, and now he's Superman, puts his glasses on, and now he's Clark Kent. How can you like a superhero like that? It is so pathetic. How can you do that? Maybe in the same way you're supposed to believe this about the story of Jesus in his disguise, because when he has his gardener clothes on, no one can recognize him. When he has his gardener clothes off, oh, it's Jesus, we recognize him. Maybe it's the same type of thing that we are supposed to believe here. When did they recognize him? How did he disappear and reappear from one place to the other? How did he transport himself? Does he just fly? Does he hover? Does he able to fold time and space and go from one period to the other? We don't know. The text doesn't tell us. There's no explanation how he gets from point A to B. Why don't they recognize him? He disappears and then he reappears behind closed doors in Jerusalem. He appears to them on the road to Emmaus. He appears at the garden to the woman. Now, I must tell you something, that this idea of appearing and disappearing, perhaps it was just a vision. There's no reason for us to believe from the text that they're actually seeing the physically risen Christ. Now, many people who are apologists, those who apologize for, I can't believe there's such a subject even in a religion, but they are apologists, people who apologize for Christianity for a living. The apologists will have us say, there were eyewitnesses, and they give us a list of eyewitnesses. And we're going to go through those eyewitnesses, or one of them specifically, and show you how he wasn't an eyewitness. But anyway, people disappear and appear behind closed doors on the way to different places all the time in the narrative. And we wonder why this happens. In fact, stories must have been around during that time that would distract people, or maybe even distract the enemies of the disciples and Jesus by saying, you know, 1 minute he was here, next minute he was there, giving him these supernatural abilities to perhaps prevent people from hunting this person down. Perhaps this whole idea of appearing and disappearing, having a body that you can't touch, because if you touch this body, maybe you'd be evaporated or whatever it might have been, or you'll be burnt or you'll be incinerated, was a way to keep people from accosting Jesus or the person who was actually put on the cross. Maybe this was all just a story created to put fear into people from trying to hunt down or look for or search for this Jesus. So that's why these stories were added into the New Testament. Maybe these were just concoctions to distract people, to distract the enemies from persecuting the survivors, those people like the disciples and the mother and the family of Jesus. Perhaps none of this ever took place, and it's more likely that this was a concocted story, a made-up story to prevent people from doing this type of thing. So that makes more sense to me than the one that we have given in the narrative of why he appears and disappears. How does he get there? Nothing is given. Surely if he was able to be in one place and another place, some of the disciples would have explained this. If he was able to fly or hover or whatever, somebody would have mentioned it. It's an important piece of the narrative, far more important than eating a piece of fish, far more important than standing in the garden while the stone is rolled away. That has no significance to the story. The significance of the story is that somebody's dead and raises from the dead, or that he is able to be in one place and the other. How does he get through wars? How does he get to these different places? This is far more interesting, but we're not told anything. We don't know anything. So it is more likely that it's all just made up to put fear into those people that would want to punish, those people who would want to hunt down those people would want to persecute the early disciples or those disciples that were around, to create a mythology, to create a fear around it. These stories all came in. Nothing to do with Jesus. It really doesn't have any point in the story anyway. It doesn't make any difference to the story. If you're going to appear to someone, why don't you appear to Herod? Why don't you appear to Pilate? Why don't you appear in other countries to political leaders of those countries? Why bother appearing to disciples and people like that? They're not going to help your credibility. No one's going to believe it. Well, our time is up. We have to carry over until next episode. So make sure you join us same place. So for me, Areeb Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.